The Case of the Emerald Widow. Chapter 1, The Knock at Midnight. The brownstone on West 35th Street was quiet that night, the sort of quiet that comes when even New York City, usually restless and roaring, decides to take a breath. The radiators hissed gently, the clock ticked with stubborn insistence, and the only other sound was the steady clacking of my typewriter. I was halfway through transcribing Wolfe's notes from a dreary alimony dispute we had wrapped earlier in the week, and I was already regretting not buying a new ribbon when I had the chance. Each keystroke looked faint, as if the words themselves were reluctant to appear on the page. Upstairs, Nero Wolfe was with his orchids. 3 hours every day, without exception, he spent in those glass-walled rooms, humming tunelessly to himself while fussing over flowers more delicate than most of the clients who came through our door. If you wanted to disturb him during those sacred hours, you would have better luck trying to move the Statue of Liberty with a crowbar. It was a little past midnight when the doorbell rang. Not once, politely, the way a neighbor might call to borrow sugar. No, this was frantic, 5, 6 sharp presses in a row, like somebody was signaling SOS. I pushed back from the desk, muttered something impolite under my breath, and went to see who had the nerve to ring Wolfe's bell at such an hour. On the stoop stood a woman wrapped in mink, the collar pulled so high it nearly swallowed her face. Only her eyes showed, wide, darting left and right like a deer scenting hunters. Her perfume hit me first, gardenias, rich and cloying, the kind that lingers long after the wearer has gone. Trouble always comes wearing a scent, and this one was practically broadcasting it. "You're Mr. Goodwin?" she asked. Her voice was low, trembling at the edges. "That's me," I said. "And before you ask, yes, Mr. Wolfe is inside." "No, he doesn't like being interrupted at midnight." "And yes, you look exactly like the kind of person who's about to do just that. Come in." She slipped past me without hesitation, clutching her gloves like they were the only solid things in her world. Inside the front hall, she paused only long enough to glance around, as if making sure she hadn't been followed, before she turned to me again. "My name is Mrs. Lydia Vance," she said. Her lips barely moved, as if speaking cost her energy she didn't have to spare. "And I need help. Immediately. My husband is dead." Now, I've heard plenty of variations on that line. Husbands, wives, partners, business associates, people shuffle off this mortal coil every day, sometimes naturally, sometimes not. But the way she said it, sharp and brittle, told me this wasn't grief alone. This was panic. I didn't ask questions. Instead, I led her straight into Wolfe's office. The room was warm, the air heavy with the faint smell of beer and leather, the globe lamp casting a soft glow on the stacks of case files. Wolfe had come down from the orchid rooms, no doubt lured by the commotion. He stood in the doorway, a vast figure in his yellow silk robe, his expression already sliding toward irritation. "Archie," he said, his voice deep and deliberate, "explain why a nocturnal apparition in fur is invading my house." "This apparition," I said, "is Mrs. Lydia Vance. She claims her husband is dead." That shifted his gaze. Wolfe's eyes narrowed, weighing her without mercy. He lowered himself into the massive chair behind his desk, steepled his fingers, and gestured at the chair opposite. "Mrs. Vance," he said, "you have interrupted my orchids. This had better be compelling." She sat, clutching her gloves until the seams strained. "My husband, Henry Vance, was found shot in his study 2 hours ago. The police are calling it suicide. It wasn't. And if you don't help me, they'll close the case as if it were." Wolfe leaned back, eyelids drooping as though she were an annoyance rather than a woman with the weight of grief pressing her shoulders. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, in a voice that carried the weight of judgment, he asked, "Why are you certain it was not suicide?" She drew a shuddering breath. Because Henry had just finalized a deal worth millions. He was planning a trip abroad. He feared death, always. He would never choose it. And most importantly, she faltered, swallowed hard. The emerald is missing. That word dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Even Wolfe stirred, his brows lifting a fraction. "Emerald," he repeated. "The Vance emerald," she said. "A stone worth nearly $500,000. Henry kept it locked in his study safe. After he died, it vanished." I whistled softly. "So this is no ordinary tragedy. We're talking murder with a side order of theft." "Not theft," she corrected, eyes flashing. "Betrayal. Henry only trusted a handful of people with the combination to that safe. Myself, his secretary, and his brother Charles. One of them killed him. I need you to prove which before the police close their eyes to it." Wolfe groaned, leaning his massive frame deeper into the chair. "Madam, you must understand my conditions. I do not leave this house. If I take your case, I will conduct it from this chair. Mr. Goodwin will gather facts in the field. You will pay a retainer of—" "Money is no object," she interrupted quickly. "I'll pay whatever sum you demand. Just find the truth before it's too late." His lips twitched at the corners, but not in amusement. He studied her, silent, letting the weight of his scrutiny press down until she shifted uncomfortably. Finally, he nodded once. "Very well. Archie, tomorrow you will see Inspector Kramer. Extract what details you can without provoking him into one of his tantrums. After that, you will visit the Vance residence and acquaint yourself with the environment." Relief spilled across her face like a dam breaking. "Thank you, Mr. Wolfe. You don't know what this means." "Oh, I do," Wolfe muttered. "It means my comfortable week has been ruined." She rose, adjusting her coat. At the door she turned back, her voice trembling. "One more thing, if anyone asks, I was never here. For my own safety, I beg you." And then she was gone, leaving only the heavy scent of gardenias behind. I shut the door and turned back toward Wolfe. "Well, boss, looks like we've got ourselves a widow, a corpse, and an emerald worth a fortune. How's that for a midnight snack?" Wolfe reached for one of the bottles of beer lying neatly on the side table. He opened it with a grunt, took a long swallow, and said one word, heavy with disdain and inevitability. "Pfui." Chapter 2, The Weight of Suspicion. The next morning started like most mornings at the brownstone, Wolfe at his oversized breakfast table, demolishing a mountain of eggs and sausages with the concentration of a general planning a campaign, and me with coffee strong enough to prop up my eyelids. The air smelled of food, orchids, and Wolfe's perpetual disapproval of the world at large. "Archie," he said between bites, "we must establish whether Mrs. Vance's husband was dispatched by his own hand or by another's. That distinction governs all subsequent inquiries." "Yes, sir," I said. "And step one is letting Inspector Kramer give me his version of the fairy tale." Wolfe scowled. "Kramer is obstinate, irascible, and frequently wrong. You will endure his smoke, extract facts, and avoid antagonizing him beyond necessity. That's me, boss. Charm incarnate." By mid-morning I was at police headquarters. Kramer's office smelled like it always did, old cigars, stale coffee, and irritation. He sat behind his desk, chewing the stub of a cigar that looked like it had lost a fight with a bulldog. "Goodwin," he barked the moment he saw me. "If Wolfe sent you sniffing around, tell him I'm not interested in his theories. We've got an open and shut suicide." "Glad to see you too, Inspector," I said, making myself comfortable in the chair opposite his desk. "Mrs. Vance doesn't agree with your neat package." Kramer snorted. "Widows never do. They can't stand the thought their husband chose the exit ramp. Easier to blame someone else." I leaned back, crossing my legs. Maybe. But Henry Vance had millions lined up in a deal. Planning a trip abroad. Scared of death. Doesn't sound like the type to eat a bullet. Kramer's eyes narrowed. "You've been talking to her already." "Figures. Listen, Goodwin, I'm not here to hold your hand." We found Vance slumped at his desk, gun in hand, one shot to the head. Door locked from the inside. No sign of forced entry. Case closed. "Locked room suicides," I said lightly. "Always so tidy. Except for one small detail, the missing emerald. That got him." The cigar stub paused mid-chew. "What emerald?" "The Vance emerald. $500,000, give or take a few zeros. Mrs. Vance says it was in the safe. Now it's not." Kramer's face darkened. "Damn it, Goodwin. If that's true, she should have told us. We didn't find any emerald. She told Wolfe. Maybe she doesn't trust you." He slammed a fist on the desk. "That woman is playing games. Fine. If there's a missing jewel, it changes things. But until I see proof, it's still suicide. And if Wolfe meddles, I'll—" "Relax," I cut in. "We'll stay out of your hair. As always." His glare could have curdled milk, but I left with what I needed, confirmation of the locked room, the gun, and Kramer's irritation, which was always a reliable barometer of when Wolfe was onto something. The Vance mansion was a different universe from police headquarters. White stone pillars, manicured hedges, and a front door polished enough to see your reflection in. A butler with an expression carved from granite opened the door and informed me that Mrs. Vance was resting. "I'll take the brother first," I said. Charles Vance was waiting in the drawing room. He was tall, thin, and carried the look of a man who had spent his life in someone else's shadow. His handshake was limp, his eyes wary. "My brother's death is a tragedy," he said, as though reciting from a script. "But suicide, well, Henry was under pressure. These business dealings, you know. Perhaps he reached a breaking point." "Funny," I said. "Your sister-in-law doesn't buy that theory. She says it was murder." A flicker crossed his face, annoyance, quickly smoothed over. "Lydia is excitable. Grief makes people imagine things. Like a $500,000 emerald walking out of a safe." This time his composure cracked. His fingers tightened on the arm of his chair. "The emerald is missing?" "So they say." He looked away, jaw working. "I assure you, I know nothing of it. Henry was always secretive. He didn't share his business with me. I must check on Lydia." And with that, he excused himself, leaving behind a faint odor of guilt mixed with expensive cologne. The secretary was next. Her name was Margaret Hale, a woman in her early 30s with sharp features and eyes that seemed to catalog everything at once. She sat at a tidy desk outside Henry Vance's study, papers stacked with military precision. "Mr. Goodwin," she said when I introduced myself, I was the last to see Mr. Vance alive. He dismissed me around 9 o'clock. When the police arrived later, they found the study locked. It was dreadful. Did he seem troubled? Not at all. He was in good spirits. In fact, he mentioned confirming travel plans for Europe. So not exactly suicidal. She hesitated, then shook her head. No, sir. I wouldn't say so. Did you know the combination to his safe? Her lips thinned. Yes. Mr. Vance trusted me with it. But I never accessed it without his instruction. And you didn't the night he died? Her gaze hardened. Certainly not. I left when he told me to leave. I studied her. Calm, composed, precise. The kind of secretary who could manage a fortune, or hide a crime, with equal efficiency. Before leaving, I asked to see the study. The police had finished their work, but the room was still heavy with the aftertaste of death. Papers were scattered on the desk, a faint stain on the carpet near the chair, the air faintly metallic. The safe sat against the wall, its heavy door yawning open. Empty. I crouched, inspecting the edges. No scratches, no sign of forced entry. Whoever opened it had known the combination. Locked door, open safe, missing emerald. The ingredients for a puzzle Wolfe would chew on like a gourmet savoring a difficult dish. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in his chair, surrounded by the aroma of beer and orchids. I laid out the details: Kramer's suicide claim, the missing emerald, the brothers' evasions, the secretary's precision. He listened without interruption, eyes closed, fingertips pressed together. When I finished, he opened them slowly. "Confound it," he said. A locked door, an empty safe, and a jewel vanished. I abhor puzzles designed to mock reason. "Then you'll love this one," I said. "Because someone's playing games, and the stakes are $500,000 in green rock." Wolfe reached for his beer, took a deliberate sip, and muttered the one word that meant he was hooked. Pfui. Chapter 3, Shadows in the Study. The following day dawned gray, with a drizzle that turned the city streets into slick ribbons. New York has a way of making rain feel less romantic and more like a personal insult. By the time I hailed a cab and headed back toward the Vance mansion, my shoes were damp and my mood wasn't much better. Wolfe had, of course, remained in his chair, issuing instructions with the gravitas of a Roman emperor dispatching legions. "Archie," he had said that morning, "bring me the truth of the study. Objects tell stories if you listen. The police are deaf. You must be otherwise." So there I was again, in the polished mausoleum that the Vance family called home. The butler looked even less pleased to see me than before, but he ushered me toward the study with the resignation of a man who has long since given up protesting the whims of his employers and their uninvited guests. The study was as I remembered: heavy oak furniture, thick carpets, shelves of books that probably hadn't been opened in decades. The air still carried a faint metallic tang, a reminder of the bullet that had ended Henry Vance's life. The safe stood like a silent witness against the wall, its gaping emptiness an accusation. I crouched again, this time with more patience, running my fingers along the edges. No tool marks. The combination had been used, not brute force. That meant Mrs. Vance, Charles, or the secretary, Margaret Hale, had opened it. Unless, of course, Henry himself had opened it before being killed. "Looking for something, Mr. Goodwin?" The voice was cool, precise. I looked up to see Margaret Hale standing in the doorway, clipboard in hand, like she was taking inventory of my very presence. "Just admiring the decor," I said lightly. Oak paneling, bullet holes, safes missing jewels, it's all the rage this season. Her lips tightened. If you intend to mock, do it elsewhere. Mr. Vance deserves respect. Fair point, I said, straightening. Tell me, Miss Hale, you said you left him at 9. Did you hear anything unusual after that? Visitors, calls, arguments? She shook her head. Nothing. The household retired early. Mrs. Vance was in her rooms, Charles had gone out. I locked the outer office as I always do. And the safe? You're absolutely certain you didn't access it? Her eyes met mine without flinching. Absolutely. Mr. Vance never permitted me to open it in his absence. The trouble was, she sounded convincing. Too convincing. Like someone who had rehearsed the line 100 times. I left her and went in search of Charles. I found him in the billiard room, cue in hand, striking balls with the grim determination of a man who thought he could beat guilt into submission. "Ah, the detective's errand boy," he said when he noticed me. "Have you uncovered the sinister plot yet?" "Funny you should ask," I said. "Your brother's emerald seems to have evaporated. Any idea how?" His face tightened. "I already told you, I know nothing of it." "Sure. But tell me this, where were you the night Henry died?" "I was at the club," he said smoothly. "With friends." "You may check, if you like." "I will," I said. "And if your alibi is as solid as you claim, you won't mind answering another question. Why did your brother trust you with the safe combination?" That one hit home. His cue faltered, the ball rolling weakly against the side pocket. "Because I was his brother," he snapped. "Is that so strange?" "Depends," I said. "Did you ever use it?" He glared at me. I won't dignify that with a response. Which was as good as a confession that he had. By the time I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was elbow-deep in a platter of lamb chops, his yellow robe straining at the seams. I reported everything, Margaret's rehearsed denials, Charles's brittle composure, the stubborn silence of the safe. He chewed thoughtfully, swallowed, and reached for a beer. "And Mrs. Vance?" "She's playing the grieving widow card," I said. "Keeps to her rooms, avoids questions. But she's the one who brought us in, so unless she's a world-class actress, I don't buy her as the killer." Wolfe's eyes gleamed. "That is precisely why she cannot be excluded. The guilty often seek the appearance of innocence by inviting scrutiny. A stratagem as old as deceit itself." I groaned. "So we're back to square one. Widow, brother, secretary, all with motive, all with access." "Not quite," Wolfe said, leaning back. "Kramer insists the study door was locked from within. That is an impossibility, unless either Henry secured it himself, an argument for suicide, or the killer contrived a mechanism to lock it after departure. Which, Archie, do you suppose is more probable?" "Depends," I said. "If Henry really was scared of death, suicide's off the table. Which leaves us with a clever killer and a trick door." Wolfe grunted approval. "Precisely. Tomorrow, you will return and examine that lock. Speak also with the servants. Murder in a household is rarely invisible. Someone saw, or heard, what they should not." The next morning, I did just that. The lock on the study door was sturdy, old-fashioned, and free of tampering. But a closer look revealed scratches on the latch plate, small, faint, but fresh. Somebody had worked it, perhaps with a string or wire, to simulate a self-locking door. That meant Henry hadn't died alone. The servants were less helpful. The maid swore she had been asleep, the cook said she hadn't left the kitchen, and the chauffeur insisted he was at the garage. Either they were all telling the truth, or they had been coached to sing the same tune. I left with more questions than answers, which was par for the course in any case involving Wolfe. Back at the office, Wolfe listened intently, eyes half closed. When I finished, he opened them and spoke with deliberate weight. "Archie, there are 3 suspects. Each had access to the safe. Each had opportunity. Yet only one had knowledge sufficient to contrive the illusion of a locked room. That is the lever. Apply it, and the culprit will reveal themselves." "And if all 3 were capable?" I asked. He smiled thinly. "Then we shall see which is most desperate to conceal it." I leaned back, rubbing my temples. "Boss, one of them killed Henry Vance, stole an emerald worth $500,000, and managed to make it look like suicide." "You make it sound like a parlor trick." "It is a parlor trick," Wolfe said calmly. "But one performed with lethal consequence. And like all tricks, it can be unraveled by observation." He reached for another beer, popped the cap with one practiced motion, and muttered the one word that meant he was already savoring the hunt. Pfui. Chapter 4, Motives and Masks. The rain had finally broken by the time I returned to the Vance estate, but the sky was still low and gray, the kind of ceiling that makes even a mansion look like it's hunched in on itself. My orders from Wolfe were simple: keep digging. "The jewel is bait," he had said. "The murder is the hook. Find which fish has bitten." The butler let me in with the enthusiasm of a man greeting a process server. He announced that Mrs. Vance was in the conservatory. I found her there among the greenery, sitting stiff-backed in a wicker chair while a fountain trickled nearby. The light slanted through glass panes, giving her face a pallor that matched the marble statues around her. "Mr. Goodwin," she said quietly. "You've come again. Your husband's emerald is still missing, and Wolfe doesn't like loose threads," I said. "I've got to tug on them until somebody squeaks." She folded her hands tightly in her lap. "Henry cherished that stone. He bought it not for its value but for its symbolism. He said it was a promise of permanence. A ridiculous sentiment, perhaps, but he believed it." "That makes its disappearance worse," I said. "Especially if the thief is family." Her eyes flickered. "Charles? You said it, not me. He had access. He knew the combination." She shook her head sharply. "Charles is weak, foolish with money, but not murderous. He depended on Henry's generosity too much to risk it. Unless he decided he wanted the fortune sooner." She pressed her lips together, refusing to answer. From the conservatory I went hunting the servants again. The chauffeur, a square-jawed fellow named Denton, leaned against the garage door polishing the Vance limousine until it gleamed like black ice. "Mr. Denton," I said, "remind me again where you were the night your employer died." He gave me a look that suggested he'd rehearsed this answer. "In the garage. Went in after dinner, didn't leave until morning. Checked the engine, did paperwork. No trips to the study? No calls from Mr. Vance?" "None, sir. It was clipped, practiced. Too clean." The maid was more talkative. She was young, nervous, and clearly out of her depth in a house where wealth dripped from the walls. When I asked if she had noticed anything unusual, she hesitated. "Well, I did see Mr. Charles," she said finally. "Late that night. He was coming in through the side door. He looked upset." "Upset how?" "Pale. shaking. Like he'd been sick. That was interesting. Charles had claimed he was at the club all evening. Maybe he was. But the maid's memory put him back at the mansion before the body was discovered. Back at the brownstone, I laid it all out for Wolfe. He sat at his desk, hands folded over his stomach, eyes half closed as if listening to a symphony only he could hear. "So," he said when I finished, "Mrs. Vance asserts her brother-in-law lacked the spine for murder. Denton insists he was entombed in the garage. And the maid undermines Charles's alibi. Fascinating." "Fascinating is one word," I said. "Suspicious is another." Wolfe opened his eyes. Charles Vance, caught returning home pale and shaken, yet professes an evening at his club. That is mendacity. Whether it conceals theft, murder, or something more trivial, we must pry it open. "And the secretary?" I asked. "Miss Hale," Wolfe said with disdain, "is precise, efficient, and therefore dangerous. A secretary who can manage her employer's fortune can just as easily manipulate his death." He leaned forward slightly, which for Wolfe was the equivalent of another man leaping to his feet. "Archie, we require documents. Financial records, business correspondence, anything that reveals strain between Henry Vance and those closest to him. You will charm Miss Hale until she yields what we need." "That'll be fun," I said dryly. "She likes me about as much as Kramer does." "Nevertheless," Wolfe replied. "Charm her." The next day I returned to the mansion and found Margaret Hale at her desk, typing with the efficiency of a metronome. I let her finish before leaning casually against the doorway. "Miss Hale," I said, "Wolfe would appreciate a look at Mr. Vance's recent business records. He believes they may explain why someone would want him dead." She looked up, lips pressed tight. "The police already examined them." "Yes, but Wolfe has a habit of noticing what the police don't. It's a talent that pays our bills." She hesitated, fingers drumming the desk. Finally, she pulled a slim folder from a drawer and handed it over. "These are copies. Nothing confidential leaves this house." The folder was thin, but it held enough. Correspondence showing Henry was about to cut Charles off financially, memos hinting at a falling out with his secretary over an investment she had advised against, and notes of travel plans with his wife, plans that would have left everyone else behind. When I brought the folder back to Wolfe, his eyes gleamed. "Excellent, Archie. Now we have pressure points. Charles facing the loss of his allowance. Miss Hale facing professional humiliation. Mrs. Vance facing abandonment in a foreign land. Motive, motive, motive. And means," I added. "All three knew the safe's combination." "Yes. But only one contrived the locked door." That evening, Wolfe summoned me while he poured himself another beer. His eyes were sharper now, the indolence of earlier replaced with the glimmer of calculation. "Archie," he said, "prepare yourself. The next phase requires confrontation. We must dislodge them from their masks. Tomorrow you will invite Mrs. Vance, her brother-in-law, and Miss Hale here, under pretense of reviewing Henry's affairs. One of them will betray themselves when pressed." "Pressed how?" "By their own fear," Wolfe said simply. "Guilt is a coward. It cannot stand when cornered." I grinned. "And Kramer?" "Kramer will snarl, as always, but he will come when summoned. He cannot resist the chance to see me fail, and in so doing, he ensures my success." He lifted his glass in a toast, to himself, naturally, and muttered the one word that meant the chase was about to turn serious. Pfui. Chapter 5, gathering the players. It's one thing to talk about inviting 3 suspects into Wolfe's office, it's another to actually pull it off. People don't usually line up to sit across from a man who weighs 1/4 of a ton and has a reputation for sniffing out guilt like a bloodhound in slippers. But Wolfe had given the order, and when Wolfe gives an order, my job is to make it happen, no matter how many groans or slammed doors I collect along the way. The first hurdle was Mrs. Lydia Vance. I called her that morning. Her voice on the line was clipped, brittle, as if every word cost her a piece of her composure. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, "why must I come to your employer's house? Can you not conduct your questions here?" "Wolfe doesn't leave the brownstone," I explained. "If you want him to solve your husband's murder, you play by his rules. Besides, we'll have your brother-in-law and Miss Hale there too. It's easier to sort facts when everyone's in the same room." There was a long silence, then a sigh that sounded like surrender. "Very well. I'll come this evening." Charles Vance was less agreeable. When I phoned him at his club, he barked into the receiver. "Preposterous. I will not parade myself before that self-indulgent mountebank. If the police wish to question me, let them." "Sure," I said cheerfully. "But you might want to hear what Wolfe already knows. He's got a way of making assumptions sound like verdicts. Wouldn't want him painting you as guilty just because you refuse to show up." Another silence, thicker this time. Then a growl, "I'll be there. But I'll not be insulted." "Of course not," I said. "We save the insults for dessert." Margaret Hale, the secretary, required no persuasion. She listened to my pitch, then said crisply, "If Mrs. Vance will be there, I will too. The truth must be established." Her tone carried a challenge, as if daring Wolfe to prove what she already knew. By late afternoon, the stage was set. Wolfe sat in his oversized chair, orchid tie perfectly knotted, eyes half-lidded but sharp beneath the indolence. I'd arranged the chairs opposite his desk, 3 in a row, spaced just far enough apart that the suspects couldn't lean on each other. "Archie," Wolfe murmured as I fussed with the seating, "your arrangement will do. Predators dislike proximity when cornered." "Let's just hope they don't start clawing at each other," I muttered. At 7 sharp, the doorbell rang. Lydia Vance entered first, her face pale but resolute, her black dress tailored to perfection. She carried herself like a woman who had decided her dignity was the only shield she had left. Charles arrived next, storming in with the bravado of a man who hoped loudness could substitute for innocence. He glared at Wolfe's office like it was a courtroom rigged against him. Margaret Hale came last, punctual to the second, her steps precise, her chin high. She gave me a curt nod before taking her seat, hands folded neatly in her lap. The tension in the room was thick enough to slice. I had just closed the door when it opened again behind me. Inspector Kramer barged in, cigar clamped between his teeth, his expression set to maximum annoyance. "Goodwin," he barked. "Wolfe dragged me here. Said he had something vital. If this is another of his stunts, I'll—" "Relax, Inspector," Wolfe said smoothly. "You may yet find satisfaction. Please, sit." Kramer grumbled but dropped heavily into a chair at the side. The suspects shifted uneasily, having the law present made the stakes higher. Wolfe cleared his throat. It wasn't loud, but it silenced the room. He leaned forward slightly, hands steepled. "We are here," he began, "because Henry Vance lies dead. The police prefer the comfort of suicide. His widow rejects that conclusion. I concur with her. Mr. Vance did not take his own life. He was killed. Lydia inhaled sharply. Charles muttered something under his breath. Margaret remained motionless. The facts, Wolfe continued, are simple. Mr. Vance was found with a pistol, the door locked from within. Yet the scratches on the latch plate, as Mr. Goodwin observed, suggest manipulation from without. A clever contrivance, sufficient to fool the cursory examination of the police, but not enough to withstand scrutiny. Kramer bristled. "Are you saying my men botched it?" "I am saying," Wolfe replied coolly, "that your men lacked imagination. Murderers often rely on unimaginative men." Kramer grunted but said nothing. Wolfe's gaze shifted to the row of suspects. Now, 3 individuals knew the combination to the safe where the emerald was kept. Only 3. Mrs. Vance, the widow. Charles Vance, the brother. Miss Hale, the secretary. The emerald is gone. Therefore, the killer is among you. That landed like a hammer blow. Lydia stiffened, Charles flushed scarlet, and Margaret's eyes narrowed to slits. "Outrageous!" Charles exploded. "You cannot." "Silence," Wolfe commanded, his voice dropping into the register that brooked no argument. "I require no protestations. I require truth. Each of you possessed both motive and means. Mrs. Vance, whose marriage may not have been the idyllic arrangement she portrays. Charles, whose financial dependence was soon to be severed. And Miss Hale, whose professional advice was disregarded, her pride wounded. Murder breeds in such soil." The room bristled. Lydia's lips trembled, but she held her tongue. Charles glared at Wolfe as if he could burn him down by sheer force of rage. Margaret, however, finally spoke. "You paint us all as villains," she said sharply. "But Henry was alive when I left. Whatever happened after, I am not guilty of it." Wolfe tilted his head. "And yet, Miss Hale, you alone possessed the discipline to arrange the scene so precisely. A locked door, an open safe, the appearance of suicide. That requires method." Her eyes flashed. "And you think that points to me?" "I think it points to the most meticulous among you," Wolfe said. "Whether that is you, or another who sought to mimic you, remains to be seen." The silence stretched. The only sound was the faint hiss of Kramer's cigar. Finally, Charles burst out, "I will not sit here while this man maligns me. If you must have a culprit, look to Lydia. She benefited most. With Henry dead, she inherits everything." Lydia turned on him, her voice sharp as glass. "How dare you? You, who begged Henry for money, who squandered every dollar he gave you. You have the most to gain if he were gone." Margaret's voice cut in, cool and steady. "Both of you ignore the obvious. The emerald is the key. Whoever took it killed Henry. Find the emerald, and you'll find the murderer." "Indeed," Wolfe said, his voice heavy. "And the emerald will be found." He leaned back, closing his eyes. "Tonight, you may all go. But understand this, the killer sits among you, and their time of concealment is short." Kramer growled, "Wolfe, if you're wrong." "I am not wrong," Wolfe said simply. "Archie will confirm it tomorrow." Which was news to me. But Wolfe was already reaching for his beer, signaling the session was over. The suspects filed out, rattled, angry, silent. As the door closed behind the last of them, Wolfe finally opened his eyes and looked at me. "Archie," he said, "tomorrow you will fetch the emerald." And with that, he drained his glass and muttered the word that meant the game had turned its final corner. "Pfui." Chapter 6, The Emerald Trail. When Wolfe tells you to fetch the emerald, he doesn't mean stroll down to Tiffany's and pick one out of the display case. He means, there's a clue out there, Archie, and you're the poor devil who has to trip over it. So the next morning, I put on my best tie, grabbed my notebook, and headed back to the Vance estate like a retriever sent after a particularly slippery duck. The mansion looked different in daylight. Less haunted, more fortress-like. Money has a way of armoring itself, even when death hangs over it. The butler eyed me with a look that suggested he was considering a restraining order, but he admitted me after a pause long enough to prove his disapproval. I started with the study again. The police had taken their photographs and packed up, leaving behind the stale atmosphere of a room too recently scrubbed of violence. The safe still sat gaping, its hollow interior a silent mockery. I crouched, ran my hands along the bottom, and this time noticed something I hadn't before, a tiny thread, almost invisible, caught in the hinge. I plucked it free. Green silk. An emerald might sit in velvet or silk if it's part of a necklace or wrapped for protection. The thread meant somebody hadn't just grabbed a stone, they'd taken a piece of jewelry. And if they'd been in a hurry, they could have left more behind. I searched the carpet near the desk. 10 minutes later, I found another thread, darker this time, almost black-green. It clung stubbornly to the fibers, as though trying to hide. My pulse quickened. This was something Wolfe would pounce on. But Wolfe wouldn't be satisfied with threads alone. He wanted the emerald itself. I turned my attention to the suspects again. Charles Vance was in the library, nursing a glass of whiskey even though the clock wasn't far past 10. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw tight. "You again," he muttered. "Is there no end to your intrusions?" "Not until your brother's killer is in handcuffs," I said. "Where were you really that night, Charles? The maid saw you sneaking in." "Not exactly consistent with your club alibi." He paled, fingers tightening on the glass. "The girl is mistaken. I went for air. That's all." "Air that left you pale and shaking?" "Sure. Let's pretend I buy that. While we're at it, tell me, know anything about a silk case that once held an emerald?" His eyes flicked to me, then away. "I don't know what you're talking about." Which meant he did. But pushing him further would only make him clam up tighter. Margaret Hale was next. She received me in her small office outside the study, her desk already stacked with papers, her typewriter aligned with military precision. She looked as unshakable as always. "Miss Hale," I said, "did Mr. Vance ever have the emerald mounted in jewelry?" She blinked, just once. "Yes. It was set in a brooch. Very distinctive. He bought it as a gift for Mrs. Vance, though she seldom wore it." "Too ostentatious," she said. "A brooch." That explained the silk thread. If the stone had been pried out, someone might have ditched the setting. "Do you know where it is now?" I asked. She shook her head. "No. The last time I saw it, it was in the safe." Her tone was steady, but her fingers twitched against the desk. A tiny crack in her composure. Finally, I sought out Lydia herself. She was in her bedroom, draped across a chaise like a figure out of a painting, grief and elegance woven together. "Mrs. Vance," I said gently, "your husband had the emerald set in a brooch. Do you still have it?" Her eyes widened. "No. It was in the safe. Always in the safe. I told him it was cursed, that nothing so bright could bring happiness." He laughed at me. "Cursed. I echoed. Yes, she whispered. Every time he wore it, something went wrong. Deals collapsed, friendships soured. I begged him to sell it. He refused. That was new. And it gave motive a whole new flavor. Back at the brownstone, I laid the threads, the brooch revelation, and the curse story on Wolfe's desk like trophies. He examined the silk with the air of a man contemplating a particularly puzzling hors d'oeuvre. Excellent, Archie, he said. Green silk from a jewel case. Confirmation of a brooch setting. The emerald was not stolen for its monetary value alone, but for what it represented. That is significant. Significant how? I asked. Because, Wolfe said, leaning back, a jewel in a brooch is far more conspicuous than a loose stone. A thief desiring only wealth would pry it free immediately. If it remains intact, it is because sentiment, not avarice, governs the theft. Meaning the killer didn't just want money, I said slowly. They wanted the emerald itself. Precisely, Wolfe said. Now, consider, who among them spoke of the emerald with passion? Mrs. Vance called it cursed. Charles dismissed it. Miss Hale alone recognized its ostentation. Each perspective reveals more than they intended. And the locked room? I pressed. Elementary, Wolfe said. The scratches you observed betray the trick. A wire, threaded through the keyhole, pulled the latch after departure. Only someone methodical would risk it. Only someone precise. His gaze was heavy, his meaning clear, Margaret Hale. But Wolfe wasn't ready to declare victory. He wanted the emerald in hand. Archie, he said, tomorrow you will search the premises again. Not for the brooch itself, but for its absence. A discarded setting, hidden cloth, anything to prove the stone was removed hastily. The killer will have concealed it close at hand. They would not risk transporting it far until suspicion abated. And if I find it? Then, Wolfe said with relish, we summon our guests once more. And this time, I will hang the noose. He reached for his beer, took a long swallow, and muttered the word that meant the hunt was nearing its end. Pfui. Chapter 7, The Missing Setting. Wolfe's instructions were simple, find me the absence. Only Wolfe could hand you a riddle like that and expect results. Still, after years of working for him, I'd learned that the man was rarely wrong. So the next morning, I was back at the Vance mansion, eyes peeled not just for what was there but for what had been deliberately hidden. The staff had grown tired of me. Denton, the chauffeur, muttered under his breath when he saw me crossing the drive. The maid darted away as if proximity to questions might be contagious. Only the butler remained his usual statue-like self, though even his granite face showed cracks of irritation. Back again, Mr. Goodwin? He asked tonelessly. Until this case is solved, I said. Where's Mrs. Vance? In her rooms. Shall I announce you? No need. Today I'm not here for conversation. I'm here to poke. He gave me a look that suggested he considered calling the police, then decided it wasn't worth the paperwork. The study was my first stop. I knelt by the safe again, tracing its edges, peering into the corners. Nothing new. The desk drawers were neat, too neat, as if someone had combed through them already. But when I moved to the fireplace, I noticed something odd, a faint smear of soot along the hearth. It wasn't recent, the police had probably overlooked it. But close inspection revealed something more, a shard of metal, scorched and bent. I pulled it out with my handkerchief. It was delicate, ornate, and unmistakably part of a jewelry setting. The brooch had been pried apart, its frame tossed into the fire. Only the stone remained. That was Wolfe's absence. The brooch itself had vanished, but the husk had been discarded here. A panicked move, sloppy compared to the otherwise careful staging of the locked room. I pocketed the fragment and went hunting Charles Vance. I found him in the garden, pacing like a man pursued by invisible creditors. His eyes were bloodshot again, his lips thin. "Still here, Goodwin," he said, voice dripping with disdain. "Still here," I replied easily. "I thought you'd appreciate this." I held up the charred fragment. He froze. "What's that?" "Part of the brooch that used to hold the emerald. Somebody tossed it in the fire." "Care to guess who?" He swallowed hard, looking away. "I wouldn't know. My brother never involved me in such matters." "Funny," I said. "You knew the combination to his safe." "Seems pretty involved to me." He didn't answer. Just turned and stalked back toward the house. Which told me enough. Charles was scared, but maybe not guilty. Fear alone doesn't make you a murderer, it just makes you human. Margaret Hale was in her office, as precise as ever, her pen scratching across paper. I dropped the fragment onto her blotter. "Recognize this?" I asked. Her eyes flickered for a fraction of a second before she schooled her face. "It looks like jewelry. Burned." It was the emerald setting. Someone pried the stone out and threw the rest in the fire. That someone had steady hands. Someone methodical. She didn't flinch. "You're implying me." "I'm not implying anything," I said. "I'm stating facts. Wolfe thinks the killer wasn't driven by greed alone. He thinks sentiment played a part. Maybe resentment. Maybe pride. The emerald wasn't just stolen, it was claimed." Her eyes flashed. "That's absurd." "Is it? You were the one who called it ostentatious. Maybe you hated it enough to take it away. Or maybe you wanted it as proof that Henry should have listened to you." Her lips pressed tight, but she didn't deny it. Which, in my experience, is as loud as a confession. Before I left, I checked in with Lydia Vance. She received me in the conservatory again, her face pale, her hands trembling just slightly. "Mrs. Vance," I said gently, "do you know what happened to the emerald setting?" Her eyes widened. "The setting?" "No." "Why?" "Because I found it in the fireplace. Burned." She gasped, covering her mouth. "Then the thief must be desperate. They've destroyed everything but the stone itself." Her words sounded rehearsed, too perfect. But her tears seemed real. Either she was an extraordinary actress, or grief had twisted itself around every word she spoke. Back at the brownstone, I laid the fragment on Wolfe's desk. He examined it closely, his thick fingers surprisingly delicate. "Excellent, Archie," he said. "Now we know the emerald was removed from its setting in haste. That haste betrays panic. And panic betrays inexperience." "Meaning what?" I asked. "Meaning," Wolfe said, "the killer is not Charles Vance. He is weak, yes, but not careless. Nor is it Mrs. Vance, who feared the stone. Only one among them combines precision with arrogance enough to think they could outwit both police and myself." "Margaret Hale," I said. "Indeed." Wolfe leaned back, eyes gleaming. "But proof is required. She will not confess. She must be maneuvered into exposing herself." "How?" I asked. By presenting the emerald itself, Wolfe said calmly. It cannot be far. Miss Hale would not risk pawning it. She would hide it within reach, convinced of her own cleverness. And if we find it? Then, Wolfe said, I shall summon them once more. And this time, Archie, the game will end. The next morning, I searched again. Wolfe's hunch was right, criminals rarely think beyond the immediate moment. Margaret Hale had hidden the emerald not in some distant vault but close, where she could touch it, reassure herself of its presence. In her desk drawer, beneath a stack of routine correspondence, wrapped in an old handkerchief, I found it. The emerald, green as spring leaves after rain, gleamed in the morning light. When I returned to Wolfe with the stone in hand, his smile was thin and satisfied. He set it on the desk, the light refracting across his orchid tie, and said, Summon them all. Tonight. He poured himself a beer, lifted it in a private toast, and muttered the word that meant the curtain was about to fall. Pfui. Chapter 8, The Emerald Widow. Evening at the brownstone is a ritual. Wolfe in his chair, beer within arm's reach, orchids upstairs waiting for their nightly mist. But tonight was different. Tonight the office felt less like a sanctuary and more like a courtroom. I had placed 3 chairs in front of Wolfe's desk again, and Kramer had been lured in with the promise of Wolfe closing the matter. Which, knowing Wolfe, meant at least one explosion of temper before dessert. Lydia Vance arrived first, looking even paler than before, her black dress stark against her skin. Charles followed, tense and twitchy, like a man walking into a trap but too proud to back out. Margaret Hale entered last, punctual, composed, her eyes sharp and defiant. Kramer sat at the side, puffing his cigar like it was the only thing keeping him from throttling Wolfe. I leaned against the wall, notebook in hand, though I knew Wolfe rarely needed my notes when he decided to unload the truth. Wolfe began as he always did, with silence. He let the tension gather, the air grow heavy, until every person in the room was staring at him, waiting. Then he spoke. Henry Vance, he said, did not die by his own hand. He was murdered. His death was staged to appear as suicide, the locked door manipulated by a wire, the pistol placed to deceive. This is beyond doubt. Kramer growled. We'll see if you can prove it. I already have, Wolfe said coolly. The scratches on the latch, observed by Mr. Goodwin, are incontrovertible. A man does not scratch his own door while locking himself in from within. Margaret shifted slightly in her seat. Lydia clasped her hands tightly. Charles scowled. Wolfe leaned forward, his gaze sweeping across them. The motive? The emerald. That cursed stone, as Mrs. Vance called it. Valued at $500,000, set in a brooch, locked in the safe. After Henry's death, it vanished. We now know it was pried from its setting in haste, the charred remnants found in the fireplace. And today, thanks to Mr. Goodwin, the emerald itself has been recovered. Gasps rippled across the row. I produced the stone from my pocket, wrapped in its handkerchief, and placed it on Wolfe's desk. Under the lamplight, it glowed with an eerie green fire. Behold, Wolfe said softly, the bait that lured murder. Lydia's eyes filled with tears. Charles leaned forward hungrily, then caught himself. Margaret's jaw tightened. Who among you, Wolfe continued, had both motive and the temperament to commit such a crime? Let us review. Mrs. Vance, you gained wealth from your husband's death. But you feared the emerald, despised it. You would never claim it. Charles, you stood to lose your allowance. Yes, you lied about your alibi. You crept home that night pale and shaken. But cowardice, not cunning, defines you. You lacked the precision to contrive a locked room or to strip a jewel. Charles sputtered. That's outrageous. Silence, Wolfe thundered, and Charles wilted like a scolded schoolboy. That leaves you, Miss Hale, Wolfe said, turning his gaze on the secretary. Efficient, meticulous, and resentful. Henry dismissed your counsel, disregarded your warnings. You saw him squander opportunities, perhaps even risk ruin. Pride is a potent fuel for anger. You, above all, had the discipline to fashion a locked-room illusion. You had access to the safe. And when panic overcame you, you burned the brooch's frame but clung to the stone, convinced of your own cleverness. That arrogance betrayed you. Margaret's face was still, but her hands betrayed her, tightening, twisting in her lap. You can't prove that, she said finally. Her voice was calm, but her knuckles were white. On the contrary, Wolfe said. The emerald was found in your desk, wrapped in your handkerchief. A handkerchief embroidered with your initials. I pulled it from my pocket and set it beside the stone. Margaret's composure cracked for the first time. Her eyes darted to the evidence, then to the others, and finally back to Wolfe. Lydia gasped, covering her mouth. Charles gave a bark of bitter laughter. Kramer leaned forward, his cigar forgotten. Damn it, Kramer said. That's enough for me. Margaret rose suddenly, her chair scraping back. Yes. I took it, she cried, her voice breaking. I took the emerald. But I didn't mean to kill him. I only meant to confront him. To show him he couldn't ignore me, couldn't treat me like a servant with no mind. He laughed at me, laughed. Said my warnings were hysterical. He reached for the gun, waving it like a fool, and in the struggle it went off. I panicked. Her voice choked. She sank back into her chair, trembling. Wolfe nodded slowly, as if confirming a theorem. Accident or not, Miss Hale, your subsequent actions were deliberate. You staged the scene. You stole the emerald. You attempted to deceive. Kramer stood, snapping open his handcuffs. That's all I need. Margaret Hale, you're under arrest. She didn't resist. She sat limp, eyes vacant, as if the fight had drained out of her entirely. When the door finally closed behind Kramer and his prisoner, silence filled the office again. Lydia sat stunned, her tears silent. Charles looked half relieved, half ashamed. Your husband's death, Wolfe said to Lydia, was born of pride and anger, not malice. If that comforts you, so be it. If it does not, then remember, the emerald you called cursed has claimed its last victim. Destroy it, and be done. She nodded faintly, rose, and left without another word. Charles followed, shoulders hunched. When they were gone, I looked at Wolfe. Well, boss. Another case wrapped. Widow weeping, brother lying, secretary confessing. Neat as a bow. Wolfe snorted, reaching for his beer. Neat? Pfui. Human folly is never neat. But at least it is predictable. He drained the glass, leaned back in his chair, and closed his eyes. The orchids upstairs would have to wait. For now, Nero Wolfe had dined on the only meal he truly relished, the truth.